Welcome to Elven Plot Armor, and here we are finally with the Dark Elf tier list. And thank you so much everyone that's contributed. This has had several iterations and other people sharing their play styles, sharing their takes, and it's helped me shape what I believe to be the most unbiased approach towards this. I will put in my own biases as caveats, saying that if I do or do not use things personally, but I want this to be holistic because what one person finds to be trash can be a goldmine for someone else. The way that my tier lists tend to work is we start at tier 1 and we move up to tier 5 because this tells the story of your campaign. What is useful in tier 1 will likely be a higher tier if it's still strong by tier 3. So that's why we move this way. Secondly, S tier is only for overpowered units. A unit that could have a massive price increase, could have a recruitment time increase, and you would still get it and it would still make the A tier. I am not one for S triple plus. No, S tier is basically a god tier essentially. Now the way I interpret this list is that I see S tier and A tier. These units make up the crux of what I will use on a campaign, and if you cut out the rest of the roster, I could probably still pull it off. The B tier is excellent. These are the units that you will hire in support of these A tier units usually, and while most legendary players won't use all of these, they will probably cherry pick some of these situationally to support that core of A tier excellent units. C tier is not a bad word, so please do not get offended if your favorite unit is in here, but the reality is by virtue of scaling into the late game or in the face of better options, it just is relegated to a usable unit, and players on a higher level of difficulty will opt for the more powerful and efficient options. You can still hire these units on legendary campaigns, but you are doing this knowing there are better options and doing it to maybe roleplay, but knowing that there's better things out there and you're probably having to make things work a bit. D tier is straight up outperform, may it be from a bad recruitment time, inconvenient, or just too little too late. This unit is just simply outperformed by its peers, and you are really trying to make this unit work if you choose it. And F tier is counterproductive. This unit is either so expensive, so hard to recruit, or so redundant at the stage of the game you get it, it will literally harm you and your army and reduce your chances of winning in the face of the threats at that stage of the game. Starting off in tier 1, at no surprise at all, the Darkshard. This is the cornerstone of the early game for the Dark Elves, and is the lifeblood pretty much until the middle of the game, because let's face it, your scrawny frontliners can't deal anything back, but they can hold the line. This is how you deal your damage. Now, these guys use crossbows, so they're dealing armor-piercing damage at tier 1, and this is astronomically good and part of the reason why they stay so good until the mid-game. Being hired from a Black Ark, this will require a tier 2 barracks, but at a settlement it only requires tier 1, and you'll probably have some of these settlement barracks around because a tier 2 barracks will give you more masters. Now, the lack of a shield does hurt them, so you'll typically want between 2 to 4 Dreadspears with some characters mixed in to absorb those arrow volleys. Your early game armies will consist of at least 50% of these guys, and if you're the kind of player that likes to derp out the AI and waste all of their ammo, that number will probably go up to around 75%, because arrow fire is their weakness. Their only Achilles heel is their short range. See my formations guide on how to best set these guys up, because you will need to screen them moving in. If you're a beginner player and looking to not cheese, I would still put 11 to 13 of these in your armies with 2 Dreadspears on each flank with some characters up the front. But you can improve this range through the research, hit and run, and rework crossbows, which should be an absolute priority, granting more output as well as 15% extra range. Now, every single lord can access Ravager rewards, buffing the range on all crossbow units including shades by 15%. For non-legendary lords, they can choose a name of power. Particularly Barbstorm will increase the range and damage output by 5%. Usually I would opt for the aristocratic ones because they bolster your entire faction. This makes the revered names of power more useful towards the end of your campaign, but then why are you using these on beginner level units? Now, in Malekith's army, they're half price, so if you sink all of the skills into them, you can effectively make them nearly S tier. But regardless, they are the cornerstone for every early game Dark Elf army, and you should build yourself around them. Now, I'm going to discuss the shielded variant right here, because you will want a couple of these to screen the front line. Why is this important? Well, because your lack of range is your Achilles heel against your number 1 enemy, the High Elves, whose archers boast 180 range and can absolutely shred you before you even get close. Now, you don't need to spam shielded Darkshards, just trade out 4 the Darkshards at the front of your formation with shielded variants, and they'll be able to soak up the missile fire and help you get closer, safer. Their shield will mitigate 55% of all missiles coming in, so this is the counter to Elithanar's Shadow Warrior spam, as well as basically any other High Elf heavy missile army. Again, Malekith makes these half price, so if you're having any trouble versus High Elves, throw a few of these in and watch their magic work. Next, we have the Black Ark Corsairs, which have two variants, and let's just quickly address the melee variant. It is D tier outperformed. We just explained that melee is not how the Dark Elves deal their damage, and these guys are simply a tightly grouped clump of target practice. Given your crossbows will need time to close that distance to deliver damage, you need shields with your melee infantry, and these guys don't have it, and they certainly don't deal enough damage to warrant this. You could put a couple behind your Dreadspears as counter charges, but you are really trying to make this work in the face of a group of Darkshards that could deal the same damage from afar. But let's just talk about the Handbow variant, because this is technically a tier 3 unit, and it doesn't usually punch above this, and this does make it very expensive. However, this is a fantastic crisis unit. It can be hired from any Black Ark or any settlement containing a port. Now, their missiles aren't armor piercing like their Darkshard brothers, and they have terrible range, which makes them very lackluster in sieges, but put a couple behind your Dreadspears and they can perform very well as a counter-charging infantry, moving around the back, raining arrows in and then charging in, and they basically deliver the same melee damage as their non-handbow variants. Most notably, they can fire while moving, meaning you can throw skirmish mode on them, and against some early melee armies like Norskins and Lizardmen, you can just kite them around for days and then shoot them to pieces. But they also have some horrible matchups, namely the High Elves. We've just been through how you need shields. These guys don't have it, and they have the shortest range bow damage out of all the elves, so I'll let you work out how that one's going to go. These guys are very expensive, and even if you hire them in a crisis, you should look to disband them and replace them with Darkshards when you can, because Darkshards offer more efficiency, more flexibility in sieges, and won't sink your economy. However, as a crisis unit, this works excellent as a hybrid infantry, able to come in, rain some arrow damage in, and once they run out of ammo, they can charge in and do decently. The revered name of power Kraken Lord will give double armor piercing damage to these guys, which is nice, but you'll probably wanting to gravitate towards Shades or even shielded Darkshards instead of these guys. But one Lord that does want to keep them is Lockyer Fellheart, who can boost these guys up to an A tier unit and have a pretty awesome strike squad that will last at least till the late mid game. Just remember they're an offensive infantry unit and are not a substitute for Dreadspears. Next to C tier, and we have Usable, and this unit is pretty much the king of its tier. Certainly not good enough to be a B tier solid unit, but man, you will use this unit, the Dreadspear. And honestly, it does everything you want a basic unit to do. It's got a spear so is anti-large, has charge defense versus all, is affordable, and most importantly has a shield to help you close the distance. And this is the best use for Dreadspears, moving up to shield your Darkshards from arrow fire. Even just having one or two on each flank will help defend against cavalry, although on the front line, heroes probably do a better job because they can bunch the enemy around them, allowing your arrows to do their job. Purely by the Dark Elves' lack of shields across their units, these guys actually still stay relevant way longer than they honestly should. They're honestly not bad, but they certainly are not good. They're squishy elves, they will die, but they can protect the units of value and be recruited anywhere. The reason why the Dark Elf Spearmen are C tier and not B tier like the High Elf variants is because of Murderous Prowess, which they get in place of the High Elf's Martial Prowess, which is the buff that allows their melee infantry to stand and hold much better. Murderous Prowess, on the other hand, basically gives you more energy and a rough 20-25% increase in your damage, but this also translates into range damage. And now down to D, outperformed, and we have the Bleakswords, the dire Dreadspears themselves. They literally are a Dreadspear that swapped their weapon for a sword, so they can't negate cavalry charges, they can't hurt cavalry more, so they're good at killing infantry, which is what your Darkshards are good at doing. Am I making enough sense as to why you should never hire these units? The only reason why you would hire them is because of their shield, which Dreadspears also have, and bring all of the other benefits that Spearmen have. If you really want, you can put a couple of these in your second line, but you're doing it because you want to do it, not because you need to. Now tier 2, and we have our first S tier overpowered unit, and this is the regular Shade. And once you can afford the better variants of Shades, you won't need this anymore, but this can be recruited from Black Arks only at tier 2, meaning your fleet of Blackhawks don't need to be a super high level to start spitting out masses of these units. They are also the cheapest variant, and given the other variants only boost the melee abilities, meaning that the crossbow damage stays the exact same, this is the most efficient way to get bulk crossbows onto the battlefield. Shades are reasonably good in melee, especially for a ranged unit, but this should be a situation of last resort and not the way they deal their damage. Now to just generally talk about Shades, out of the box they are only an A tier unit, but after you unlock their research they become an S tier unit instantly. I know what you're going to ask, are they better than Sisters of Avalon? Well no, definitely not out of the box. But when you get all the buffs on them, it gets pretty darn close. I haven't even mentioned that Shades have Shrouds, so the enemy won't even be able to see them till they're there. So if you like to have a bit of hit and run fun, these guys can also deliver that. But after the right buffs, they function very similar to the Sisters of Avalon, being an incredibly devastating archer block that will just shred anything on land or in the air before it ever gets close. And if you do so want to flank, their Shroud allows them to do this, lending themselves better to the Dark Elves' aggressive playstyle. So at least in a Dark Elf army, they can effectively be better than the Sisters of Avalon, and this will effectively act as a replacement to your Darkshards in your armies, making up at least half of most of your mid to late game armies. This isn't hard to achieve because you can recruit them so easily from Blackhawks, and a level 5 Blackhawk can recruit 7 units at once. Through regular Lord skills and research, their range can match that of the regular High Elf Archer. But things can get really silly with non-legendary Lords, i.e. Sorceresses, who can use a revered name of power, and similar to Darkshards, Barb Storm will work on all ranged infantry, giving 10% more damage, 40% more ammo, and another 5% more range. But the most ridiculous one is Shadow Dart, which gives Shades 35% extra range. Now add that onto the 15 skill points, 15 for research, and that is 65% extra range. That's like 215 range, I can't remember, but it is well above what Sisters of Avalon can deliver, so you can beat High Elves at their own game, which is just hilarious. Now to discuss the other variants, by the mid game the first or second building on your Blackhawks should be the Shade building, because at tier 3 you get access to the other two variants. Firstly, the dual weapons, which increases their melee defense and gives them some anti-infantry. When you do have the money, this is a straight up upgrade and should be the one you opt for because it is also recruitable in a single turn, so there is no disadvantage to this other than cost. Let your wallet decide which one you need more. Only down in A tier is the great weapons version, which allows for more anti-armor damage, and having a couple of these on your flanks can be nice if you have the time to recruit it, and often you will take more than one turn to recruit. But also you'll often want to be on the fly, meaning the dual weapons do outperform them here. And at the end of the day, you really don't want to be in melee with Shades either. Each of these units will cost an additional 15 gold, but if you've got the gold, having some armor piercing on your flanks in melee, why not? The biggest catch is they take 2 turns to recruit, and this combined with the price rise is actually what makes them a balanced but devastating A tier unit. All 3 versions of Shades are absolutely devastating. Build your military around them and you'll do well. Next in A tier, we have our very first hero, the Master, and he is an excellent hero both on and off the battlefield, being able to stop your slave decline in your settlements and stimulate growth on the campaign map, and on the battlefield he is a shielded line holder, and something the Dark Elf armies lack, so this is just a great all-round unit. They do require tier 2 barracks built at a settlement, but don't spam this too much in the early game. Make sure your economy comes first and you have enough with the Sycophantic Schema trait to reduce your slave decline in your capital. Not only can he block arrows, he also has excellent melee defense, so if you want him on the battlefield, keep on bolstering that melee defense, armor, and everything defensive, and this guy will do wonders for you. My advice is do not mount this guy. Keep him on foot. He is far more valuable here, holding the line against your archers. Pretty much the same rule as the noble. Now, if you're a more advanced player, you can put him on the chariot. If your micro is good, you can do some awesome stuff with the chariot, can micro around and devastate their artillery. So against enemies like the Empire Dwarves who use more artillery, this could be a good idea, but against most of the early to mid game threats, the on-foot version will deliver more and defend the key units. Especially if you're a new player, do not get that Flying Pegasus, it's not worth it. That's a great mount for casters, but yeah, unless you're trying to cheese the game by wasting ammo, this guy's more valuable on the ground. Now, while you will want a barracks, you definitely do not need a stable anywhere. However, you will capture or procure through Confederation several settlements with a tier 3 stable. Hire the units you want and then trash the stable. One unit you do not want is the Dark Rider without a crossbow. There are two versions, and the one without the crossbow is basically just target practice. I mean, tier 2, you can use it if you really want. However, this unit will not last and will definitely not survive past tier 3. The crossbow variant is a C+ unit, but here's the catch. It has a crossbow, it's got a really short range and cannot fire while moving, so if you're running 1 or 2 units of this, particularly against high elves, who you will fight a lot, they're going to move in, the archers will turn around, return fire, and absolutely shred these guys. That doesn't mean they're not good. Darkriders with crossbows are excellent at taking out enemy artillery. They can be vanguard deployed, wait for the army to move forward, and then charge out of the forest, shredding the artillery. Armor-piercing crossbows will help this get done, and if you're a god with micro, you can probably make this perform like a B tier unit. So if you want, add 1 or 2 units of this into your army for some fun and flexibility, but it's definitely not needed, and stay the hell away from the non-crossbow variant. I'll take this opportunity to talk about the shielded variant because all it will do is maybe block a few arrows before it charges into melee and probably loses because, let's face it, like the elves that ride them, their horses are probably very good at being pretty and doing equestrian, but they're not so good at brawling. As soon as their charge bonus wears off, they'll be shredded and your money down the drain. And you should never hire them above the other tier 3 cavalry we're about to discuss. So let's just mention our very last tier 2 unit, which is the Witch Elves, who are one of the Hag units. And before we move on, let's discuss the Hag units as a whole here. So firstly, what is a Hag? Well, essentially they're devoted worshippers of Cain, regularly partaking in sacrificial blood orgies. Since an elven man's upper body is comparable to that of a female's, basically Hags are the backbone of the offensive Dark Elf infantry. So picture this, you cheat on your girlfriend who's sadistically trained in martial arts, now multiply her by 50 and send them charging your way. That is the terror of Dark Elf Hags. This terror is encapsulated by Murderous Mastery, which replaces Murderous Prowess. This grants them fear, replacing the missile damage buff, which they obviously have no use for. All Hags opt to dual-wield blades, meaning that they don't carry shields, so they will have to endure some missile damage, but they make up for this by having a high degree of physical resistance. This means once they get into melee, they can tend to stand surprisingly well given their lack of armor. But don't forget that they are lacking armor. Like all things Dark Elf, it'll help them hit better, but boy, they cannot take too much of a beating. Given that offensive infantry are meant to countercharge into an existing engagement, instead of taking a charge, high foot speed and a great charge bonus is going to help them here, and that's what makes Witch Elves so much better than Bleakswords or Corsairs without bows in this role. Now, the Witch Elves are the tier 2 variant, and their biggest issue is they don't stay very good for very long. They only have 26 melee defense, which is not going to hold the line. So don't spam this unit nor put it in your front lines. I myself would only ever use 2 or even 1 of these units, not because of their fighting ability, but because of their poison blades. These instill the madness of Cain, which means the afflicted person will rampage and get stuck in combat with a -10 melee defense modifier. This means you can glue that troublesome unit in and just completely maul them with them having no chance to escape. Witch Elves can deal some decent melee damage, but you will take casualties and you will struggle to keep these alive. So their Madness of Cain blades are really the only reason you would keep them here, so they're more of a tool than an offensive infantry. Now to talk about the big guns, the Sisters of Slaughter, the tier 3 equivalent, and this is a solid B tier unit, and Crone Hellebron's army makes them an A tier unit. Once again, do not spam this unit. They're not even really ideal for your front lines, but put them in your second lines. Having between 2 to 4 of these in your army can produce some good results. Ideally, you do want shields on the front line first, but they have a 20% physical resist, which makes them arguably the best line holders they have at this stage. They also stand in elusive formation like Witch Elves, which means they're more resistant to range fire and high damaging spells like the Burning Head. And they're going to hold that front line because they have 56 melee defense, and that's double that of the Witch Elves. And fair enough, they don't have the Poison of Cain, but they do have regular poison, which will debuff the enemy's speed and damage. Behind a shielded unit can certainly deal good results. Later in the campaign, they will struggle to stick around and you will have trouble keeping them alive, but for the stage in the game they come around, I would give them the crown as the best melee infantry in the Dark Elf roster. While Crone Hellebron can spam them, between 2 and 6 is more than enough. They are a solid B tier unit, and they definitely don't get above this because they have a 2-turn recruitment time. Now in tier 3, S tier, first and foremost the Sorceress, and unlike the High Elf Sorceress, you can boost your capacity at a tier 3 building as opposed to tier 4, which means you'll be getting a lot more, a lot sooner. Try to get the knowledgeable trait which will boost the global winds of magic you'll have, so you can have some insane winds of magic across your entire empire with more casters, so on paper you will have more magical bite than the high elves at most given points of the game. Typically choose a Law of Fire and you'll instantly have a one-woman army that can take a Flying Pegasus to great effect, and this is a perfect mount for casters. Small, nimble, can avoid arrow fire. Many advanced players prefer these small nimble mounts able to go in and surgically dumb spells rather than large bulky dragons which attract a lot more missile fire. Now the Law of Dark is the unique law of magic and it's about on par with the high Law of Magic. Certainly not as good as fire, and I would say that Shadow is probably a second above this law, but it does give you means of healing if that so much floats your boat. Regardless, the Sorceress is a one-woman army and you should have one in every single army. And even if you don't have an army to put one in, hire ones with the knowledgeable trade. Down from the S tier into A tier, we have the Assassin, which also comes from the Shrine, and on the battlefield it's very meh. It does a little bit of melee, a little bit of range, doing neither very good, but the reason why you want them in your army is to power level them to level 10, and then send them back to your slaving provinces to bolster your worker revenue. Now, while this does sound like a means to an end to power level them, because it is, heroes on the front line are always good to have to help clump up enemy infantry for your archers to shred. Not surprisingly, also off the battlefield they're very good at assassinations, which is another very fun way to rank them up quickly, but if you absolutely want, they can work on the battlefield. You can pump them up to have respectable melee defense, and their crossbows can do some nice sniping damage, albeit not from very far away. Just make sure you gauge what you're fighting because they have a tendency to get beat up a bit. Right next to them in A tier, but certainly a step behind, is the Death Hag, and this is by far their most lackluster hero, but it is still a hero like we just said. She can get a good amount of physical resist. This is kind of handy because she can also pass as a line holder, but also dive in as an offensive infantry. Given that most elves struggle to deal damage in melee, having characters that are able to do this for you really does help patch a hole in your army. One of her most useful traits is her ability to replenish your armies after battle. She can take a cauldron mount, which can give you some nice bonuses, but personally I'd opt to keep her on foot. And just remember, the cauldron does look cool, but it's bigger and can really soak up a lot of damage. If you're a god with your micro, you can do some amazing things with that cauldron, but if you're not quite there yet, I would absolutely keep them on foot where the Dark Elves most need them. Down to B tier, and we have the Bolt Thrower, which is B tier, just like the High Elves one. And why is that? Because it pretty much is the High Elves one, but there is one key difference, and it's not the unit, it's the army they find themselves in. The Dark Elves suffer from short range with their crossbows, usually through a hail of arrows, to close the distance so their superior crossbows can find their mark. Having bolt throwers allows you to hit shielded units like Loth and Seaguard. Having the extra reach from 1, 2, or at most 3 of these can really help. If the enemy doesn't have artillery, peppering them with ammo will force them to come to you. Combined with you moving in on them in a solid formation means you can force the engagement and have much more control over it. The Dark Elves also have a harder time getting mounts with Siege Attacker and don't have rights that provide this either, meaning you are much more reliant on your siege equipment. You certainly don't need these to complete your sieges, but for those that argue they are a staple for your armies, I can completely understand why, and they can perform just as well. They belong firmly here as a B tier solid unit. Just remember, always use multi-shot, even against walls. The only time you use a single shot is against a single monster like a giant. Next we have the Scourgerunner Chariot, and this bad boy sets a new standard on chariots. 84 speed over the 66 speed on the Cold One variant, and it fires a pair of anti-large crossbows. It has great speed for a chariot and can actually damage large creatures. Want to hurt infantry? That's fine, just run into them. This is a really flexible unit, has high mass meaning it can charge into infantry and easily free itself, not getting tar pitted, fire while moving with decent range, and bonus damage versus large means that it can stay relevant. While we're on the topic of chariots, let's talk about that Cold One chariot. This is up in tier 4 and is completely outclassed by the Scourgerunner. It only delivers anti-infantry output, and Anti-infantry just is not an issue by this stage of the Dark Elves. If you've done the right things and focused on your crossbow research, this is your anti-infantry damage. Crossbows can also take down monsters and flyers, whilst your humble outdated chariot is searching around for infantry to run into. And let's not forget, you might run into infantry with halberds, which will make this thing regret its life choices. Whilst regretting said life choices, it has the primal instincts rule, meaning that you will lose control of it due to rampage. There is a high chance that will rampage, not be able to free itself, and then get killed, and you can't do anything but watch. Now with Scourgerunners at tier 3, it's not even relevant. Also in B tier, we finally have a cavalry unit here in the form of the Doomfire Warlock. So how do you make an elven cavalry good? Well, they can pack a bit of a punch charging, but sustained combat just really exposes them. So how do we improve this? Well, we give them some abilities. Doomfire Warlocks have access to an area of effect debuff, and this is a targetable spell, so they don't even need to be close to use this. If you have excellent micro, you can do some amazing things with Doomfire Warlocks. Whilst they can do a bit of cycle charge damage at the start, you want to use them as harassment, peeling units away, and using their Doom Bolts. That's right, they can cast a lesser Doom Bolt, so they even have a little bit of application in sieges, a rare trait for melee cavalry. They are the definition of a glass cannon, but they have 92 speed, so they are just as fast as Darkriders, can deal good damage against higher level enemies in the form of their Doom Bolt, and their ability to cast debuffs means they can support melee infantry and can vanguard deploy, making them an excellent harassment and distraction unit. So you do need good micro to make good use of these. In terms of hiring these guys, I would never build a stable, but you will conquer a settlement with a stable. And at this point, hire 1 or 2 Doomfire Warlocks and then trash the stable. Now finally in B tier, the Bloodwrack Medusa. Now when you get this, it absolutely wrecks. And it's not too inconvenient to recruit either, as it comes from the exact same building you'll be hiring sorceresses from, which you'll want in every single capital. This thing has a 50 charge bonus, so it is excellent at cycle charging, dealing excellent armor piercing damage for this stage in the game. The downside is it only has 30 armor, so when that charge bonus wears off, this thing will struggle to push up. I must stress the dominance of this unit when it becomes available to you, but it will increasingly struggle with the challenges beyond this point. Last and certainly least in tier 3 are Harpies. Now this unit can harass archer formations, and I say can here because if archers see these guys incoming, they might well move back and you might prevent them firing. Now your scenario depends on them not having more archer units. Any nearby archer units worth a damn will turn, and these things are not fast enough in the air. They just drop like a herd of unarmored bats, and honestly harassment is all they can do. There is no reason to hire these, and just stay away from them. Now to kick off tier 4, one of the most iconic units in all of Total War Warhammer, the Hydra, and this thing does earn its reputation, not just as a monster, but as a tool that synergizes with the Dark Elves' strengths. If I had to name the biggest strengths of the High Elves over the Dark Elves, I would have to say life magic. The ability to tank with heroes and then heal them before the next battle, it's just unrivaled. It is so good in terms of campaign. Well, here's the deal. The Hydra has regeneration, meaning this can do your tanking, and all you have to do is wait for it to regenerate. Now, while it is big and far from unkillable, it certainly packs a punch, and like a dragon, it has fire breath, which will take some practice to get the most out of. If you ask many Dark Elf players what their best monster is, they would probably say this one, and there's good reason for it. Enemy units will crowd around, allowing your archers to really easily support this thing. It has great mass and can push its way out, has siege attacker, and stays pretty relevant until the end of the game. Some people would even argue for this to be an S tier unit, but its turns to recruit and being available at tier 4 doesn't make it broken or overpowered, just an A+ unit, and although I love my dragons being impartial, this is the best monster in the Dark Elf bestiary. Now the Kardibdyss. The Kardibdyss is the uppity big brother of the Hydra that nobody likes. It does anti-large damage, so it can tangle with the bigger beasts later in the campaign, but at this stage you will have shades with spec'd up crossbows to take out those big enemy monsters that they're not likely to miss. You don't need a monster to take down monsters. This doesn't have the regeneration of the Hydra, and whilst it's able to take more of a hit, the lack of this and no fire breath firmly puts it a tier below in terms of usefulness. Most of the scenarios that Dark Elves will face can be dealt with Hydras, Shades, or Black Dragons at the end of the game, and this unit simply doesn't find its niche in a specialized matchup. But in Rakkath's army, this is an A tier unit. He has a skill which gives them their unique frosted breath, meaning that they become a super frosty nasty Hydra. But for everyone else, this is a B tier unit and honestly unnecessary over the Hydra. Now as we walk into the realm of elite infantry, we hit the C tier of tier 4, and I'm going to discuss both of their elite infantry at the same time to justify their placements. Hanging in there at C tier usable is the Black Guard of Naggarond. This is the token anti-large monster slayer with a halberd with high armor piercing damage, but lacks a shield, so depends on their very high armor to keep them safe. Although the lack of a shield does hurt and firearms will tear them apart, they are unquestionably the best line holder the Dark Elves have available to them. With melee defense that towers over the Har Ganeth Executioner and Shades, they are the best equipped unit to handle anything that breaks through your lines, and let's face it, at this point it is most likely either to be a monster or a large amount of infantry, in which case you want high armor and high melee defense to try and hold the line so those archers can do their work. So after all this, why is this in C tier? Well, at this stage of the game, you'll be fighting a lot of sieges and fortifications. These guys just simply do not function as well as Shades. Dark Elves get their hero caps increased at tier 3. You will have a ton of Death Hags, Masters, Assassins, anyone else to hold the line that will do so for better and for cheaper. To boot, these guys take 3 turns to recruit, so they are incredibly inconvenient. The building that they are hired from can only recruit them, as well as Cold One Knights, and we'll get to that. So you're not likely to build this building, and let's face it, it's going to be low on the priority of buildings for your Black Arcs. So where is a place you would recruit it? At Naggarond, the buildings can be upgraded to hire them in a single turn, and here they are actually worth getting. Recruit 4 of these in an army whilst recruiting mass Shades from your Black Arcs, and this is an excellent crisis army to field when chaos inevitably come from the north. Although far from perfect, they can hold the line, although again you only want between 2 and 4 max in any given army because heroes will do just as well. Now all those benefits I've listed don't apply to the Har Ganeth Executioners. Now this unit on the other hand is an anti-infantry unit, and they suffer from the same issue as Swordmasters of Hoeth. They are a decent unit that doesn't support the army they are a part of. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but elves deal their damage through arrows, not swords. Immediately that makes the anti-armor focus of this unit quite redundant. Also only with 31 speed, they don't have the flanking potential that Sisters of Slaughter had back in tier 3, so you're not likely to get those nice chunky decisive charges in, and even if you could, Shades will deal far more damage. Now in terms of their defensive capabilities, well, it's got 100 armor, so I guess it could hold the line, but if you want it to hold the line, it needs good melee defense. But their melee defense is virtually the same as Shades, so yes, whilst their armor will protect them, they're not really that much better at dueling than Shades are. Now compound this with the fact that you can extend your Shades range through research, you've now subbed out a unit that's far more expensive, takes far longer to recruit, and cannot shoot any arrows, with a unit with a sword that might be able to deal some damage and can take a few hits. Under ideal circumstances, Black Guard of Naggarond holding the line for your Shades to do their work will perform much better, and once again they suffer from the high availability of heroes that can hold the line for you, making these elite infantry far less relevant. So the Manticore is a flying beast, and it is the first decent flying creature that the Dark Elves get at their disposal, so better late than never, and technically it can harass archer formations. So if this was a tier 3 unit, it would actually be pretty darn good. Now, what's its catch? Well, the catch is it has primal instincts and is prone to rampaging, and since you are using this as a harassment unit, if it takes one hit too many, it's going to get pissed off and dive straight into the enemy backlines. The thing is, they'll probably have some halberds and spears there, ready to tear this thing apart, and there's a good chance you'll never see it again. However, it does have a nice blend of being small and nimble, yet it does have siege attacker, and still has some relevance in sieges once you're inside. Now, as you know, I try not to let my own biases get too in the way and look at other people's playstyles to find uses for certain units. It is with great disappointment I report that as awesome as a giant raptor might sound, they are goddamn useless and they make our very first F tier entries counterproductive on our tier list. We will start off with the tier 4 variant, the Cold One Knight. What could be worse than Cold One Chariots? Well, cold ones without the chariot. So they're a rider on a Cold One, which is essentially a giant raptor, and he carries a spear, so he should be able to win against cavalry, right? Well, probably not. The stats are actually very mediocre, relying on a very beefy charge stat. But here's the deal, they're not going to catch any large units with their measly 66 speed. If anything, they are going to be the ones getting charged. If they make something break, it's going to run away before they can kill it. But that's not even accounting for the fact that archers will target them and they are slow, large and lumbering and they will take damage. But that's not the best part. They have primal instincts, so may it be in melee or from afar, if they get pissed off enough, the rider will lose control and just start senselessly attacking a unit and the unit will die because it's impossible to miss them with arrows and they're so slow, they can't get away. They are a god-awful unit. Like, I cannot stress this enough. I want to like this unit, and believe me, I have looked and I have tried to make this unit work, but goddamn, it is awful. And while we're here, let's address the tier 5 variant, the Cold One Dread Knights. This is a unit that would struggle to be usable at tier 4, and it's got decent melee stats in the 40s with a shield, so it can maybe soak up some arrows before it charges in, but it has the exact same issues. Well, firstly, that shield is only a bronze shield, so it's only stopping 35% of damage, and that's from the front. This unit will still take arrow fire, and once it's in melee, it's going to probably take some damage too, so the chances of it rampaging are very real. It focuses on infantry, and you've already heard the story through the Har Ganeth Executioner. This is not an effective tier 5 means of dealing with infantry. Being even more expensive and taking multiple turns to recruit, especially being a tier 5 unit, I can soundly say never ever take this unit. It is god awful. Now, on a positive note, tier 5 A tier, we have the fantastic Black Dragon, a personal favorite of mine, and it's not always necessary given how good Hydras are. You don't need this unit, but having one or even two in your late game armies can certainly give it some bite. In terms of power and strength, it sits between a Moon Dragon and a Star Dragon, a bit closer to the Star Dragon in terms of power. Its breath attack falls between the two, covering a larger area than the Star Dragon, but not doing quite as much damage. And similar in melee, the Black Dragon is more proficient against mid to late game threats, but lacks the huge armor piercing damage of the Star Dragon, which makes it more appropriate for singular confrontations. I know Doomstacks are all the rage, but there is no need to Doomstack this unit. Balanced Dark Elf armies are far more economical, and remember, your army only needs to be good enough to win. It doesn't need to be so good it rolls everything. You want enough so you can comfortably win, but not to the point you can't hire more armies to either defend or expand your frontiers. If you do want to Doomstack, there is a revered name of power called Beastbinder, which will give a 20% upkeep and charge bonus. Given how much the late game will be siege battles, dragons will always perform well here, so I honestly think that having one or two in each army adds a nice amount of flexibility. It's a unit I highly recommend and just sits slightly behind the Hydra overall as their best monster, and an army can absolutely benefit from having a pair of each. Last but not least, we have the Bloodwrack Shrine, and this really is what you would expect as a tier 5 equivalent to the Bloodwrack Medusa. The only issue is that it is a little bit dated by this time. Now, this is actually a good unit, delivering good damage and has decent mobility. The only issue they have is at this stage of the game, this particular anti-infantry unit is facing infantry that can really bite them back nastily with halberds. Heroes can hold the line better, and crossbows deal the anti-infantry damage this monster seeks to achieve. Moreover, this unit struggles to compete against its contemporaries. The Hydra is still a regenerating beast whose fire breath will destroy all low to mid-tiered infantry. The Black Dragon can fly over fortifications and is great during sieges. This unit is a monstrous beast that isn't quite monstrous or beastly enough. You can absolutely hire it and achieve good things with it, but it is completely unnecessary and you're doing it because you want to do it. If you're highly skilled, you could probably make it perform at B tier, but that same same effort could be used to elevate the higher tier contemporaries. And that's the complete Dark Elf tier list, rated from tier 1 to tier 5 across the course of your campaign. I personally love laying the list out like this. I think it tells a great story of your campaign and why certain units are the way they are. Just to iterate, I can personally say that everything in the S and A tier are units that I hire in every single campaign. The various gaps in my army will be supported by the B tier units and very occasionally the C tier units. I do play on legendary difficulty, but what is optimal on legendary is the exact same that is optimal on normal, it's just more forgiving. C tier units are a personal preference and you can absolutely use these to good effect to support your armies. However, you will see these increasingly less on the higher levels of difficulty. And of course D tier and certainly F tier, do not ever expect to see these units hired on legendary difficulty. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to thank anyone who's engaged with me in conversations around strategy. Personal thanks and shout out to the Discord members. There's a link in the description if you would like to join in the community and have discussions about these kind of strategies. Please feel free to share the content if you think it might help someone else out. And of course, like, share, subscribe if you have found this entertaining. This is Elven Plot Armor. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Cheers.